All right, our next speaker is Dr. Michael Platt. All right, let me try. Dr. Michael Platt is a neuroscientist known for asking some of the most challenging questions in the 21st century neuroscience, and conceiving innovative ways to find the answers. Principal questions focus on the biological mechanisms that underlie decision-making in social environments, the grasp of which has broad-scale implications for improving health and welfare in societies worldwide. Michael received his BA at Yale. Sorry, is this going in and out? It's okay. Michael received his BA at Yale and his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, both in anthropology, and did a postdoctoral fellowship in neuroscience at New York University. Currently, he's the director of Wharton Neuroscience Initiative and holds a faculty position in the marketing department at Wharton, the Department of Neuroscience in the Perelman School of Medicine, and the Department of Psychology in the School of Arts and Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania. All right, again, if you have any questions, please just get a microphone from someone on the aisle, and with that, I'll hand it over to Michael.
Okay, thanks, Alice. Can everybody hear me? We're good? Okay, great. Great, I've got twice as much information in front of me. So, yeah, well, I'm grateful to the students for inviting me and setting this up, and I know it's an incredible amount of work, and I really do appreciate their initiative and organization. It's really fantastic. So I've been a practicing neuroscientist for about 20 years. Practice, but I'm not yet perfect. Over the course of those 2 decades, I mean, we have learned tremendous amounts about how the brain works. So not only how we make decisions, but how our emotions work, how we remember things, how we make connections with others. During that time period, we've learned a tremendous deal about how different brains work differently, so why I might behave differently from Josh in a particular situation, so we're not actually identical people, and our brains reflect that. And there's been this incredible pace of discovery of new ways of treating people who have disorders of the brain that lead them to make poor decisions or to have difficulty connecting with other people. And so what my real, my passion right now is not only to try to continue to refine our understanding of the brain and how we can use that knowledge to help people have better lives, but also to say, do we now know enough about how the brain works? Do we now have the technology? It sounds like the $6 Million Man introduction. But basically, can we turn that arrow around, flip it from the clinical direction, and aim it towards business and society and say, can we use our deepening understanding of brain function and dysfunction and increasing developments in technology to enhance business, to make business more effective, more efficient, and more humane? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So basically, give you a bit of a broad overview for why we might be interested in doing this at this time, here and now, and then maybe give you a flavor for 4 areas of business where I think the science is ripe to be applied, and in some cases it is, and in other cases it's ready to go. And so if you're game and energetic, you can just run out after this talk and go ahead and make yourself millions of dollars. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with an example that we all know from Econ 101, right? Markets are rational. So we know that stocks trade at their fundamental value. Everybody knows it, right? It's exactly what we all learned, right? And of course that's absurd. The reason it's absurd is because there are people involved, right? And the decisions people make are guided by psychology. So, they're overconfident, or they're greedy, or they follow the herd, creating bubble markets, right? Or tax cuts unleash their animal spirits, whatever the hell those things are. Yeah. So, how in the world are we supposed to understand the way markets work if we don't understand human psychology? And really, traditional ways of understanding or trying to understand human psychology are based on people answering questions. Okay, self-report, psychometrics, and this is fine, right? But sometimes people don't have very good access to what they're thinking, right, or what's guiding their decisions, or they don't want to reveal it. Okay, this is sort of the notion of experimenter demand when people come into the laboratory and you ask them to do things or tell you why they're doing things and they don't tell you. So psychology can be limited in its ability to access what's actually driving people to do the things that they do. Of course, there are other ways that have been developed to try to provide a little bit more substance. So behavioral economics, for example, we've all heard a ton about the work of Kahneman and Tversky and others over the last several decades, basically using people's economic behavior, behavioral economics, to try to understand what's motivating them, to understand the incentives in their brains that are actually driving them to behave. But of course, this is still completely agnostic. This approach is completely agnostic to what's actually going on inside a person's head. And of course, nowadays, there's new sources of data, right? Click trails on the internet. What are people doing when they're surfing the web and when they're buying things? What does their GPS in their phone reveal about how they are moving through supermarkets? Okay, so these are new sources of data aggregated across many, many millions or billions of consumers, can provide potentially some refinement of models about in terms of what's actually guiding the behavior of people during their decisions. And my proposal to you is that why don't we get to the source of all that data? Okay, so human brain, 3.5 pounds, give or take, lying between your ears. Okay, meat and fat in there. This is the source of all that data. Every thought you have, every decision you make, every memory that you have, right? It emerges from this incredible organ that we all heard about from Alice. And I don't want to give you the impression that this is easy, right? There are 80 to 100 billion neurons in your brain. They make 100 trillion connections with each other. These neurons communicate with each other largely through chemical neurotransmitters. There are dozens of them. So this adds this incredible complexity to what we're doing. And in fact, there are probably many people in this audience who would, who are going to jump up after this and say, I don't even understand how a cubic millimeter of the retina works when you are seeing a photon of light. How can you say that we can apply this to business? It is definitely a big challenge. But what I'm going to argue is that we, in fact, know enough to begin applying. And I also want to give you an appreciation to build on what Alice said, that there are many ways of studying neural function, some of which are more relevant for business applications and some of which are less. So kind of the gold standard, right, that we have is to actually listen in on what neurons are saying. So park a sensor inside the brain near a neuron, pick up action potentials that Josh was talking about, and actually listen in on their conversations. Okay, so this is bedrock. This is what the fundamental biology is doing. Okay, you can't do that routinely or ethically in a human being. Certainly not something you can do while they're walking through Walmart. Kind of the next best, I'm missing now, the next best kind of access to the brain we have is using various kinds of brain imaging. Put a person in an MRI machine, take snapshots of their brain in action. This provides basically a map, okay, of the architecture of the processes that are motivating any kind of behavior or decision. Okay? Again, this is expensive. It's cumbersome. Okay? You have to go to a university, a medical center, and line an MRI machine, or if you're going to have PET scans, get radionucleotides made to trace the activity of what's going on in the brain. Not something that you're going to drag around Whole Foods on your head while you're shopping. So there are other techniques like EEG that Alice talked about. Okay, less precise in terms of the sort of the spatial sensitivity of this technique, but it's something that you can do much more cheaply and much more scalably for business-related applications. And we can step back even further. So in business applications, it's common to use eye tracking as a means of assessing the information that is guiding a person's behavior at any point in time, because we point the center of our gaze, the center of our fovea, which is the high resolution part of our retina, at the information that we find most useful to guide our behavior. And eye tracking gives you another signal for free, which is basically the size of the pupil that under all conditions being equal and under isoluminant conditions, so when the light is the same, basically that size of the pupil provides a readout of some processes that are very relevant for making decisions, including how aroused you are, how engaged you are, how much attention you're paying. And we can even step back a little bit further and take as a signal something as simple as heart rate. Seems very divorced from what's going on in your brain. Largely it reflects the activity levels in which you are engaged and your fitness, but we're now coming to understand that heart rate provides some information about what's going on in your brain in terms of your arousal levels, how alert you are, and also, and we'll come back to this, some very intriguing findings that, in fact, the heart rates of individuals become more synchronized when they have a stronger social connection with each other, providing potentially a really accessible signal for measuring how likely people are to be able to work together very effectively. And of course, nowadays, we're beginning to be able to take these techniques, especially peripheral physiological measures like eye tracking, heart rate physiology, even EEG, put them into wearable devices in which the signals can be transmitted wirelessly, so we can take people out of the laboratory, out of the clinic, and put them into real-world situations where we can measure these signals in real time in ways that allow us to make some inferences about what's going on in their brains while they are making decisions. So the first domain of applications that I want to talk about is decision making. You heard a lot about this from Josh, and I'm going to amplify upon what he said. Basically, we have, over the last 25 years, really sketched out the basic processes that underlie decision making in the brain. Josh talked about Banburismus and this model of the accumulation of evidence favoring one interpretation of the world over another. And what I want to do is build on that now and say this model can be applied to not only decisions about what is the state of the world, what am I seeing, is it a Coke can or a Pepsi can, but this can accommodate our own individual sense of subjective value for these different options. So if you're faced with a decision about what you want to drink, and first of all, you have to decide whether, is that a Coke can or a Pepsi can? Right, as Josh said, your brain is going to begin taking snapshots of evidence and accumulating it over time. And that accumulation process is basically equivalent, it cannot be 5 minutes remaining. The accumulation process is basically like having a bucket for each of the two options, okay? And the accumulation process is filling up a bucket. First bucket that fills up is the one that wins. And if you happen to prefer Coke strongly over Pepsi, as I do, then the flow of information into the Coke bucket is going to be much faster than the flow of information into the Pepsi bucket, and will lead you to make that choice, okay? Now, why is this interesting? It's just interesting in and of itself, but there's some very important physiological constraints on these processes that arise from the fact that neuronal activity is very expensive. Okay, the brain chews up about 20 to 25% of the glucose and the oxygen that you take in, and so neural circuits have learned to become very efficient over the course of evolution. And so one of the ways that they do that is to divide out the background, basically to signal change from some baseline. And that's why, for example, in this kind of image here, you tend to see these gray squares in the middle as being different shades, okay, different brightness, but in fact they're exactly the same. And that's because the background luminance is being effectively divided out, normalized out. Now let's go back to that sort of accumulating process, the two buckets filling up. It's easy when you are confronted with two options like a Coke and a Pepsi. You walk into a typical convenience store like this, and now you're confronted with this welter of options. If basically you're dividing out all the background, it makes it very, very difficult for any of those buckets to fill up. People have a lot more difficulty making decisions under these conditions. This is often called the tyranny of choice, and they often feel bad about it afterward. So it's those kinds of effects, basically the fundamental physiological constraints of nervous system function, that we think can help us to understand things like tyranny of choice and decoy effects, et cetera, and that can hopefully help us to design choice sets that help people to make better decisions. So I'm going to turn to another. I'm going to really try to rip through these because I've gone a little bit slowly apparently. The second set of applications really pertains to how we can use neural signals to predict behavior. I would say that 10 years ago, I thought this was lunacy and science fiction, but in fact it's a reality. Much of this kind of historically stems from this ability to predict, stems from a study. I'm going to just call this the sort of the historical antecedent for all this. It goes back to some work done at Baylor by friend Reed Montague. Basically recording or studying people's brains while they were making choices about whether they wanted a squirt of what they thought was Coke or Pepsi. In fact, it was exactly the same brown sugar liquid being squirted into their mouths. And if people really loved Coke and you told them it was Coke, then these reward-related parts of the brain would light up, and you gave them a squirt of the same stuff and you said it's Pepsi, you get nothing. Okay, so these areas are really reflecting how much people subjectively value their preference for these options. Fast forward 10 years, and now this is neuromarketing. Okay, so you can use fMRI, you can use EEG and other kinds of peripheral physiological measures to make predictions not only about what the individuals you are studying, what they prefer, whether they like an advertisement or they're engaged in it. But in fact, you can make out-of-sample predictions. So you can take a couple of dozen undergraduates in the laboratory, have them watch some movie trailers, measure their brain responses, and predict ticket sales at the movie theater over the next 3 weeks. Okay, that's pretty remarkable, and you can do so at least in this study that came out of Kellogg last year, an order of magnitude better than you can using traditional marketing approaches based on willingness to pay and what people say they like. I think that's pretty remarkable. If you're doing focus groups for advertising and you're not using neural measures, you're wasting your time and your money, I think. Okay, I'm going to turn to the third area, which is something that we're all, everyone in business is talking about, which is innovation. If we could only get people to be more innovative, we could develop better products, we could make more money, solve more problems. Okay, over the last 10 to 15 years, we as a field have come to a real understanding of the systems that underlie, on the one hand, our ability to focus and carry out routine tasks, and on the other, our ability to kind of think outside the box, to explore new ideas and new options. And it turns out that those systems are completely separate. And they are mutually opposed with each other. They're the yin and yang of the brain. They're not the left brain and the right brain, it turns out, but there's one circuit here in red and yellow that is kind of the focus network, and there's another circuit up here that's in green and blue that is the exploration or innovation network, and it is shut down when you are doing a routine task like answering your email, and it's only active when you disconnect. And so if you were, just sort of take-home message for you, if you want to be innovative, if you want to be creative, you need to disconnect and get out and stop doing routine things. And another just kind of soapbox thing that I like to comment on is that, we in Western society consider individuals who have difficulty focusing, who have difficulty sitting still, like my kids do in school, as something to medicate, right? So we use drugs of various sorts to try to regularize behavior. One thing that is very clear, and if you talk to people who are like CEOs who've been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder in their 40s or 50s, they say, yeah, it's great, I'm taking Ritalin, now I always remember my keys when I go out of the house, but I don't have any, my creative juices are gone, and I have basically, my life is very unpleasant. So what my, kind of take home from this is that rather than simply medicating everyone so that we are the same, why don't we take advantage of everyone's their own talents, right? And so this is something that actually Google did quite structurally with their organization. They a few years ago created Alphabet, a parent company, and within that they have some divisions that carry out routine tasks in a sense, Google Search, Google Mail, Calendar, etc., right? You can just keep that going, keep the money flowing in, and then they have other divisions like Google X and Google Ventures that are more kind of blue sky creative outfits, and you can basically put people into those divisions in a way that fits their talents. And I swear to you, this is the end here, so I'm only a little bit over. This is sort of near and dear to my heart, which is our increasing sophistication of understanding of the neural circuitry and the biology that allows us to connect with other people. We understand a lot about this now. I love this, this was thinking about Olympics about a month ago. I came of age in 1980. I don't know what that means, coming of age. I guess I was 13. But that was back in the era of non-professional Olympians, except in the Soviet Union. And that was the year that Herb Brooks, who was the coach of the U.S. men's Olympic hockey team, assembled not the best athletes in the world, not the best hockey players, but the best team. And he used principles of psychology. He was a psychologist to identify players who would have great chemistry. Okay, and lo and behold, they ended up beating the unbeatable Soviets, and they took home the gold medal. Fast forward to this year, Google tries to do a data-driven approach to understanding what makes a good manager, what makes for effective teams. It turns out it's not being a really good coder, okay, or a really good engineer. It's soft skills, it's people skills, it's the ability to connect with others. Okay, in the last 10 or 15 years, we have really come to understand that there is a circuit within our brains that is specialized and dedicated for identifying other individuals, understanding their emotional states, predicting their likely actions, and forming strong connections with them. The health and integrity of this circuit, the so-called social brain network, predicts how many friends you have, okay, and the depth of those connections. It's not all fate. because we know from some monkey studies that basically if you manipulate the size of a monkey's group, you can change the size of his social brain network. So if he has to deal with more monkeys, if he has to learn how to get along with more individuals, the thickness of these brain areas will grow as the neurons make new connections. It's like a muscle that you can exercise. In the last few years, several studies have come out showing that when people actually connect and they communicate well, okay, their social brain networks begin to synchronize. Okay, they come into alignment in terms of their processing. And what's really exciting about that is that seems to also occur at the level of their peripheral physiology. We don't understand why. But for example, in this study here of Spanish firewalkers, basically these guys would walk barefoot across hot coals. You put heart rate monitors on them and you put heart rate monitors on people who are in the audience. The people who are connected to them, or their friends and family, their heart rate goes up exactly in time with the firewalkers. But the other people in the audience, you don't see that, even though it's a very exciting event for everybody. So several studies have now shown that the degree to which people's heart rates come into alignment is a good predictor of trust, of teamwork, and of mutual understanding. Okay, so I think this is really cool because this gives us the potential to utilize neural signals, even as simple as heart rate, as a means of doing HR better. Okay, so can we identify people for teams, in terms of their fit with each other? Can we monitor and enhance the onboarding process? This would save, untold millions of dollars for companies and actually make life better for people. Because I don't know if you've ever worked with a team or on a company that was really unpleasant, right? Because you couldn't connect with people. This would hopefully make people's lives better. So with that, I'm just going to leave this slide up there. And you guys can think about it or take pictures of it, and during that time, maybe I have time for one question. So it better be a good one. Okay. Is there one question? Yeah.
As you learn more about the brain, you said in the last decades you've learned a lot, and you've gone places you never thought you would go.
Yeah.
Using that knowledge. Do you think there's a moral imperative to not do certain things? Like, I work in the field of digital web and phone apps, and so I happen to know that there's great research supporting the fact that we can make you addicted to an app. Because we understand your brain
Yep.
chemistry, we understand
Yep.
how to get that repetitive motion of opening an app and checking your app and
So I think right. So this is a question about the ethics of all this, and I think this is a hugely important topic. Our Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, we held a summit on this back in February. There's kind of 2 points here. One is that it's not up to the neuroscientists to decide. This is something that we have to decide as a society, and that we need the engagement and involvement of people, people from law, people from consumer protection, et cetera. In many ways, this data isn't much different from the other kinds of health data that there are already protections in place for. We just have to understand how we're using it and what the limits might be. I think that critically, and these principles were articulated by our own President Amy Gutmann when she was head of the President Obama's Bioethics Commission, that we have to make sure that people give consent, that that their autonomy is preserved, that their dignity is preserved, and that access is actually open. Because while some of these applications might seem a little, they could be used for ill or for good, I think if you think about it, there are many ways in which they could definitely be an improvement and enhancement for society. But it's something that we definitely have to wrestle with. It was a great question. Thank you.